Room 101, Episode 6, X-Men Origins, Theodore Sturgeon's 1953 science fiction masterpiece, More Than Human. In this episode of Room 101, my intent is not to suggest that the creators of Marvel Comics superheroes, the X-Men, ripped off Theodore Sturgeon from a book he wrote 10 years before the launch of their iconic superhero team. However, considering the success and popularity of More Than Human during the 1950s, there is no doubt that X-Men creators Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were directly influenced by Sturgeon's landmark novel. This episode will not contain any spoilers relating to More Than Human because you should really read it. See links in the description. In the realm of science fiction, people often think of interstellar space travel, alien beings, quantum physics, and other such hard science trappings of the genre. Ted Sturgeon's More Than Human is the polar opposite. Instead of going to outer space, Sturgeon explores the concept of human mutations on modern-day Earth, and in doing so, creates a riveting and often tragic story of misfits who found the ultimate strength in each other. Sturgeon's writing is lyrical and profound, conjuring up an atmosphere that recalls Bradbury or Matheson more than Asimov or Clarke. It is unlike any science fiction story I've ever read, and I cannot recommend this book highly enough.
Wonderful ear, wonderful sense of prose. Nobody much, except perhaps Bradbury, had paid any attention to style in science fiction.
He knew how important it was to reach readers through beauty in a way that a lot of science fiction writers didn't really think about.
Born in 1918 in New York, Edward Hamilton Waldo used the legal name of Theodore Sturgeon for his books and stories. He sold his first story in 1938 and went on to publish many novels and several short story collections in his lifetime. He also wrote for TV shows, including The Invaders, The Twilight Zone, and Tales of Tomorrow. But it was 1953 that saw Sturgeon release his sci-fi masterwork, More Than Human, the story of unwanted mutant children who find each other and form the most powerful group of humans on Earth. It won the highly coveted International Fantasy Award in 1954 and became a centerpiece in science fiction for decades to come. Description from the original book. Lone, a young simpleton who can hear other people's thoughts and make a man blow his brains out just by looking at him. Janie, a neglected, intelligent little 8-year-old girl gifted or cursed with telepathic and telekinetic powers of unbelievable magnitude. Bonnie and Beanie, 3-year-old twin sisters with telepathic abilities who can also teleport themselves anywhere in the blink of an eye. Baby, a mongoloid infant whose body never matures but whose computer-like brain is constantly expanding, absorbing data at a lightning-fast pace. Jerry, an orphan, a street urchin, who has the power to take facts and memories from anyone's mind and make people do his bidding. A young man who has everything it takes to run the world except for a conscience. Separately, they are talented freaks. Together, they compose a single organism that may represent the next step in evolution and the final chapter in the history of the human race. You may recognize the powers described here: mind control, telepathy, telekinesis, and teleportation. In Marvel Comics, the X-Men, all of these powers and more are utilized by the superheroes, but the most interesting aspect is that while the X-Men are powerful alone, they are certainly more powerful brought together under Professor Xavier's wing. As in More Than Human, some of the X-Men are more dysfunctional alone and need to be part of the mutant team to achieve their full potential. And so it is with Sturgeon's novel. The book spans a few decades, with the first part focusing on the main character, Lone, a poor, uneducated boy cast out of society. He lives in the forest, hunting animals and doing what he can to survive. He eventually connects with Janie, Bonnie and Beanie, and the baby, and they live in an earthen hut deep in a remote forest area. Here, they all communicate with each other telepathically and learn of each other's unique mutant capabilities. Together, they form the strongest force on planet Earth, and perhaps represent a major evolutionary leap for mankind while being shunned by that very same humanity. Without getting into any spoilers, the story is told in 3 major parts, introducing and subtracting a few key characters along the way. During the same period Sturgeon wrote More Than Human, Stan Lee was a busy editor at Atlas Comic Books, which would eventually fold into Marvel Comics. He was editing pre-code science fiction and horror comics, while Jack Kirby was drawing horror comics for Prize Publications and their famous Black Magic comic book series. In a few years, these titans of industry would join forces and usher in the Silver Age of comics, with superheroes like the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Thor, and of course the X-Men in 1963. While there's nothing on paper suggesting that More Than Human had a direct influence on the X-Men, both Lee and Kirby loved science fiction. They all worked in New York, and the connection between the science fiction and comic book worlds was as strong then as it is today. Stan Lee was familiar with Sturgeon's work, as evidenced by the 1971 Marvel comic book Supernatural Thrillers, featuring Theodore Sturgeon's story called It, originally written in 1940 about a humanoid swamp monster. It was the same year that Marvel released the very popular Men-Thing, also about a humanoid swamp monster. Coincidentally enough, More Than Human was made into a heavy metal magazine graphic novel in 1979, adapted by Doug Moench, with art by the great Alex Nino. To read More Than Human or listen to an audiobook, please see the links in the description.
Sturgeon also had an insight into character that you didn't go to Heinlein or Asimov, or for that matter Bradbury, for. He understood real people, not just science fiction characters piloting spaceships around, although he wrote plenty of that, but people with pain and love, and he put them into science fiction contexts. No one had ever done that before, and hardly anyone has done it as well since.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Room 101. As always, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.